He fixed the assembly with a stern look. "Oh, that reminds me. If you encounter an intoxicated human during your travels and they smell of alcohol, it would be highly advisable to run. For your own sanity if you're lucky, for your life if you aren't." The mood in the chamber had grown distinctly uncomfortable. Several counselors were fidgeting in their seats. "Their food is exceptional, however," Chuck added, his expression brightening slightly. "Among the many souvenirs I brought back from my visit, I am proudly in possession of numerous large tomes of knowledge revolving solely around their culinary arts." Just then, a messenger burst into the room, interrupting the report. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion," the soldier called out, holding the seal of the intelligence department high in the air. "Report, soldier," the Emperor commanded. "The Haxus Dominion has declared war on the humans," the soldier announced. "They wish to enslave them." Chuck released a long sigh. "I'll bet my collection of books on human culinary arts that the humans will win the war within a year." "I'll take that bet," the Minister of War said immediately. "I'll wager my personal heavy cruiser that the Dominion will destroy the Terran Alliance in at least 5 years. Did I forget to mention the humans can play dirty?" Chuck wondered aloud, a slight smile playing at his lips. The next week, reports came flooding in of a human victory during the first battle at the edge of the Sol system and the subsequent nuclear bombardment of several Haxus military outposts. The devastating attack forced the Haxus leadership to enter peace talks with the humans after they threatened several other worlds with their dreaded weapons. "Did you expect this to happen?" the Emperor asked from his seat next to Chuck on the observation deck of the latter's new personal cruiser, one from the Minister of War, as per their bet. "I didn't even know that the humans had fission bombs at their disposal," Chuck responded, gazing out at the stars. "I believe they had dismantled each and every one of them some 200 years ago." "What did you expect the humans to do then?" the Emperor's consort, Chuck's older sister, asked curiously. "Honestly, I expected the Terran Navy to rout the Haxus fleet, then launch an all-out invasion deep into Haxus territory, culminating in an invasion of Haxus Prime itself," Chuck said thoughtfully. "Oh, come on. Surely they're not that stupid," the Emperor protested. "I did say that they were crazy, didn't I?" Chuck replied with a knowing smile. "Oh, wait." The Emperor paused, realization dawning on his face. The Minister of War was correct about one thing. They won't be predictable in any traditional sense. "Exactly," Chuck confirmed. "The humans ended the war in a week by doing something no one expected, threatening mutual destruction rather than engaging in a prolonged conflict. They calculated that the Haxus would fold under that pressure, and they were right." He turned to face his friend directly. "Your Majesty, I cannot stress this enough. The humans are not to be underestimated, enslaved, or attacked. But as trading partners, as allies, as friends, they could be the most valuable asset our empire has ever known." The Emperor nodded slowly, staring out at the vastness of space. "Then I suppose it's time we extended a proper diplomatic invitation to the Terran Alliance." "A wise decision, Your Majesty," Chuck said, relief evident in his voice. "A very wise decision indeed." As the cruiser glided through the void, the Emperor couldn't help but wonder what other surprises humanity had in store for the galaxy. One thing was certain. The universe would never be quite the same now that the humans had joined the interstellar community. And perhaps, he thought, that was exactly what the galaxy needed. 3 months later, the first official diplomatic delegation from the Terran Alliance arrived at the Mixtel homeworld. Chuck stood on the landing platform, his ceremonial robes billowing in the artificial breeze generated by the atmospheric processors. Beside him stood the Emperor, along with a full honor guard and half the royal court. The human vessel was unlike anything Chuck had seen in their fleet before. Where their military ships were angular and aggressive, bristling with weapons, this diplomatic cruiser was elegant, almost artistic. Its hull gleamed with a pearlescent finish that seemed to shift colors in the light. "It's beautiful," the Emperor's consort whispered. "Deceptive, more like," Chuck muttered. "I guarantee that ship has more firepower than it appears." Humans don't travel unarmed, even on diplomatic missions. The vessel settled onto the landing pad with barely a whisper sound, and a ramp extended smoothly from its side. The first figure to emerge was tall for a human, perhaps 6.5 feet, with dark skin and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a uniform that seemed to blend military precision with diplomatic elegance. Deep blue with gold accents and a series of medals across the chest. "That's Ambassador Chun," Chuck said quietly to the Emperor. "Former admiral in the Terran Navy. Fought in the Kenari War. The humans chose her specifically to send a message. What message would that be? That they're willing to talk, but they haven't forgotten how to fight." Ambassador Chen approached, flanked by 2 aides and what appeared to be security personnel. Though calling them mere security was like calling a supernova a candle flame. They moved with predatory grace, their eyes constantly scanning the environment. "Your Imperial Majesty," Chen said, bowing with precise formality. Her translator rendered her words in perfect Mixtel. "On behalf of the Terran Alliance, I bring greetings and an offer of friendship." "Welcome to Mixtel Prime, Ambassador," the Emperor replied, returning the bow. "We are honored by your presence." As the formal greetings continued, Chuck studied the other humans who had disembarked. There were perhaps a dozen in total, each distinctly different from the others. One wore what appeared to be traditional clothing from one of the Earth nations, vibrant colors and intricate patterns. Another was in a sleek business suit that would have looked at home in any corporate office across the galaxy. A third wore casual clothing that Chuck recognized from his time on Earth, denim pants and a jacket with some sort of band logo on it. "They're showing us their diversity," Chuck realized. Every one of them represents a different aspect of human culture. The reception moved indoors to the Grand Hall, where a feast had been prepared. The Emperor had spared no expense. Exotic delicacies from across the Empire lined the tables, and the finest musicians had been hired to provide entertainment. Ambassador Chen surveyed the spread with an appreciative eye. "Your Majesty is most generous. I hope you don't mind, but we brought some items from Earth as well. Cultural exchange goes both ways, after all." At her signal, several of her aides brought forward containers. When opened, they released aromas that made Chuck's mouth water instantly. He recognized some of them from his time on Earth. Spices, sauces, prepared dishes that showcase the incredible variety of human cuisine. "We thought appropriate," Chen continued, "to share a meal from each of the major cultural regions on Earth. From Asia, we have dim sum and sushi. From Europe, pasta and various cheeses. From Africa, injera with various wats. From the Americas, barbecue and ceviche. And from Oceania, various preparations of seafood." The Emperor's eyes widened at the variety. "This is remarkable. You brought all of this across the stars." "Food is important to humans, Your Majesty," Chen replied with a slight smile. "It's how we build connections, how we celebrate, how we remember where we came from. We wanted to share that with you." As the feast progressed, Chuck found himself seated next to one of the human aides, a younger man with bright eyes and an easy smile who introduced himself as David Park. "So," David said, his Mixtel surprisingly fluent, "I hear you spent some time on Earth?" 15 years ago, Chuck confirmed. "I was part of an observation mission. I learned quite a bit about your species. And now you're the resident expert on the crazy humans?" David's smile widened. "I read your report, by the way. It's made quite the rounds back home. You're practically famous in intelligence circles." Chuck felt his skin flush with embarrassment, a very human reaction he'd picked up during his time on Earth. "I merely reported what I observed." "Oh, don't sell yourself short. You were spot on about most of it, though I have to say, you undersold our capacity for cooperation. We're not always at each other's throats." "No," Chuck agreed, "only when there isn't a common enemy. Which brings me to a question I've been meaning to ask. How did you convince all of Earth's nations to form the Terran Alliance? I would have thought that impossible." David's expression grew more serious. "It wasn't easy. Took almost a decade of negotiations after first contact. But the Kenari attack showed us something important. We couldn't afford to face the galaxy divided. We had to choose, maintain our old grudges and boundaries, or survive together. Survival won. But you maintained your individual governments, your different systems. Of course, unity doesn't mean uniformity. That's something a lot of species don't understand about us. We can cooperate without becoming identical. In fact, our differences make us stronger. More perspectives, more approaches, more solutions to any given problem. Chuck considered this. That's actually brilliant. And terrifying. It means you have all the benefits of a unified response without the vulnerabilities of a single point of failure. Now you're getting it, David said, raising his glass. To diversity and strength through differences? Chuck clinked his glass against David's. To understanding between species. Across the hall, Ambassador Chun was deep in conversation with the Emperor, and from expressions on both their faces, it was going well. Too well, perhaps, from the perspective of some more conservative courtiers who were watching with barely concealed concern. Later that evening, after the formal reception had concluded, Chuck found himself back in the observation deck with the Emperor and Ambassador Chun. The human had requested a private meeting, and given her credentials, the Emperor had agreed immediately. "Your Majesty," Chun began, settling into one of the chairs with a grace that belied her military background. "I'm going to be direct, as is the custom of my people. The Terran Alliance is interested in establishing a formal treaty with the Mixtal Star Empire. We would welcome such an arrangement," the Emperor replied. "What terms did you have in mind?" "Mutual Defense Pact, open trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, and joint scientific research initiatives. We're also interested in establishing an embassy here and offering the same to your people on Earth." "That seems remarkably generous," the Emperor said carefully. "What do you gain from such an arrangement?" Chun smiled. "Stability, friendship, partners who understand that the galaxy is a big place with plenty of threats. The Haxus Dominion isn't the only aggressive power out there, and while we're confident in our abilities, we're not arrogant enough to think we can face everything alone." "The Haxus situation," Chuck interjected. "I must ask, why did you end it so quickly? By all our projections, you had the capability to utterly crush them. Instead, you chose to negotiate. Because total war serves no purpose," Chin replied. "We demonstrated our capability, that was enough. The Haxus leadership understood that continuing the conflict will result in their destruction, so they sued for peace. Why would we prolong the suffering on both sides when the outcome was already decided?" "Mercy," the Emperor said thoughtfully. "You showed them mercy. We showed them pragmatism. Dead enemies can't become future allies. The Haxus may fear us now, but fear fades. Respect, on the other hand. Respect earned through strength tempered with restraint. That lasts." Chuck leaned forward. "Ambassador, if I may ask a personal question, you're a warrior. You fought in wars, commanded fleets, seen combat. Doesn't part of you want to finish what you start? To utterly defeat those who challenge you?" Chin was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant. "Of course it does. Humans are a species of contradictions." Intelligence Executive Chuck. "We're capable of tremendous violence and equally tremendous compassion. We can hold grudges for generations or forgive in an instant. We create art of breathtaking beauty and weapons of horrifying destruction." She met his gaze. "The key is choosing which aspect of our nature to express in any given situation. And the Haxus situation called for restraint, not retribution. And if they attack again," the Emperor asked, "then we demonstrate why restraint was the wiser choice," Chin said simply. "But I don't think they will. They've seen what we're capable of, and they understand now that we're not a species to be trifled with." The conversation continued late into the night, covering everything from trade routes to defensive strategies, from cultural exchange to technological cooperation. By the time Ambassador Chin retired to her quarters, the framework for a comprehensive alliance had been established. After she left, the Emperor turned to Chuck. "Your assessment was accurate, old friend. The humans are indeed crazy. And I find myself grateful that they're choosing to be our kind of crazy." The Emperor smiled. "Imagine having them as enemies instead of allies." Chuck shuddered. "I'd rather not, Your Majesty." 6 months after the treaty was signed, Chuck found himself once again traveling to Earth, this time as the first Mixtal ambassador to the Terran Alliance. His ship descended through the atmosphere, passing over landscapes he remembered from his previous visit. But something was different now. Where before there had been cities scattered across the continents, connected by roads and air travel. Now there were visible changes. Construction was everywhere. Massive projects that seemed to spring up overnight. Spaceports where there had been none. Manufacturing facilities designed to produce components for the Joint Defense Fleet. Research centers where human and alien scientists would work together. The humans, Chuck realized, didn't do anything by half measures. When they committed to something, they committed fully. His diplomatic residence was in Geneva, the city that housed the Terran Alliance's central government, a compromised location chosen because it had historically served as a neutral meeting place for human nations. The building itself was a marvel of human architecture, blending modern design with classical elements, and modified to accommodate the needs of various alien species. His first official meeting was with the Terran Alliance Council, representatives from every major nation and coalition on Earth. Chuck had prepared extensively for this, reviewing human customs, political structures, and diplomatic protocols. But nothing could have quite prepared him for the sheer diversity in that room. There were representatives of every skin tone, cultural background, and ideological perspective. They wore everything from traditional cultural garments to modern business attire. Some were young, barely out of what humans considered adolescence. Others were elderly, their faces lined with decades of experience. And they were all talking at once. Order! The council chair, a middle-aged woman from the African Coalition, called out, and the chaos subsided. Ambassador Chuck of the Mixtel Star Empire has the floor. Chuck stood, suddenly understanding something profound about humans. This chaos, this diversity, this constant negotiation and debate, this wasn't a weakness. It was their strength. Every perspective was represented, every voice heard. When they finally reached consensus, it wasn't because one faction had dominated the others. It was because they had genuinely found common ground. Honored members of the Terran Alliance Council, Chuck began, his translator rendering his words in 6 official languages of the Alliance simultaneously. I stand before you today not as superior to an inferior species, nor as a civilized being observing primitives. I stand before you as an equal, as someone who has learned that humanity's greatest strength lies not in your weapons, your technology, or even your adaptability, but in your ability to recognize that strength comes from unity in diversity. He paused, looking around the room. My people have watched your species for years, uncertain whether you be friend or foe, asset or threat. And I am here to tell you, you are something far more valuable. You are teachers. You have shown us that there's more than one way to organize a civilization, more than one path to the stars, more than one definition of strength. The Mixtel Star Empire has existed for 3,000 years. We are powerful, technologically advanced, and stable, but we have also become stagnant. Your arrival in the galactic community has reminded us of something we have forgotten. That growth requires change, and change requires the courage to be uncomfortable. Chuck smiled, a gesture he'd learned from humans. So I come to you not with demands or expectations, but with an invitation. Teach us your ways, as we teach you ours. Challenge our assumptions, as we challenge yours. And together, perhaps we can build something neither of our people could have achieved alone. A truly cooperative galactic community where diversity is celebrated and strength is measured not by conquest, but by cooperation. The chamber erupted in applause, another human custom that had apparently been adopted by the council. As Chuck sat down, he caught the eye of Ambassador Chun, who was sitting in the observer's gallery. She nodded once, a gesture of approval and respect. Later, as he stood on the balcony of his residence, looking out over the lights of Geneva, Chuck reflected on how much had changed since his first visit to Earth. Back then, he had been an observer, carefully documenting humanity's quirks and capabilities. Now, he was a participant, actively engaged in building a relationship between two very different species. His communicator chimed, a message from the Emperor. Your speech was well received here as well. The Council has voted to accelerate the joint research programs. It seems we're all catching your enthusiasm for human cooperation. Try not to go too native on us, old friend. Chuck smiled and replied, Too late for that, Your Majesty. The humans have a saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. I'm in humanity's house now. Time to learn their ways properly. As he looked up at the stars, so many more visible from Earth's surface than from his homeworld. Chuck felt a sense of optimism he hadn't experienced in years. The galaxy was entering a new era, one shaped not by conquest or domination, but by cooperation and mutual respect. And it was all thanks to a species of crazy, unpredictable, death world survivors who had somehow figured out how to turn their differences into their greatest strength. The humans were indeed crazy. But perhaps, Chuck thought, the galaxy needed a little more crazy in it. 1 year into his ambassadorship, Chuck received an unexpected invitation. It arrived via personal courier, a young human woman who introduced herself as Lieutenant Sarah Chun, the ambassador's daughter. "My mother requests your presence at a family gathering," Sarah said, her formal diplomatic tone barely concealing her amusement. "She says it's time you experienced a proper human tradition." "What tradition would that be?" Chuck asked cautiously. His time on Earth had taught him that human traditions range from the sublime to the absolutely terrifying. "Thanksgiving dinner," Sarah replied with a grin. "Fair warning, it's going to be loud, chaotic, and probably overwhelming. But Mom insists that you can't truly understand humans until you survived a family holiday." That was how Chuck found himself, 3 days later, standing in the doorway of Ambassador Chen's private residence in the countryside outside Geneva. The house was already filled with noise, laughter, arguments, music, and the clatter of cooking implements. "Ambassador Chuck." Chen greeted him warmly, wearing what appeared to be an apron covered in flour. "Welcome. I hope you brought your appetite." The next few hours were a whirlwind. Chuck met Chen's extended family. Her husband, a retired engineer who immediately began asking technical questions about Mixel technology. Her elderly mother, who insisted on teaching him a card game despite the language barrier. Her son, a musician who performed an impromptu concert. And approximately 24 other relatives whose exact relationships Chuck quickly lost track of. The dining table was absurdly long, pieced together from several smaller tables, and covered with more food than Chuck had seen outside of a state banquet. But unlike those formal affairs, there was no assigned seating, no protocol, no hierarchy. People simply sat where they wanted, passing dishes back and forth, reaching across each other, and carrying on multiple conversations simultaneously. "This is why we always win," Chen's husband said to Chuck during a brief lull in the chaos. "This right here. You see disorder, but there's a method to it. Everyone brings something different to the table, literally and figuratively. My aunt makes the best sweet potatoes. Chen's mother does the turkey. I handle the engineering of the seating arrangement, and it works because we all trust each other to do our part. Someone give me the report on the Terran Alliance and tell me if it's worth integrating the humans into our workforce." The Emperor of the Mixtel Star Empire called out from his ornate throne. "Permission to speak freely without reprisal, Your Majesty?" His chief of intelligence, Prominence Executive Chuck, immediately responded. "Permission granted," the Emperor replied with a wave of his hand. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "Forgive me, but are you out of your mind?" Chuck's blunt words sent a ripple of shock through the assembled court. The humans are crazy, insane even. Declaring war on them, let alone enslaving them, is a recipe for disaster. "Explain," the Emperor said coolly over the roars of outrage from his sycophants. Chuck took a deep breath and began his report. "True, they may seem to be united people, but in truth they are as factional as supporters of one of their team sport games, unless there is something to unite them. Say, someone declaring war on them in order to enslave them. In that case, may the gods help us all." He activated a holographic display showing Earth's political map. They have no single political structure. It appears their people are governed by dozens of different groups, each representing a different political ideology. Some allow the people full control of their territories. Others allow their citizens to vote for politicians who make decisions on their behalf. There are even a few totalitarian parties that look more like monarchies than anything else. A counselor leaned forward. "Surely such division makes them weak?" "Quite the opposite," Chuck continued. "They may be, in terms of FTL capability, the youngest species in the galaxy, but each and every one of their ships is outfitted with mass-produced FTL drives. There is no way that each and every one of them could ever be caught. They can and will simply disperse in all directions if threatened. The hologram shifted to display military formations. Their military is more divided than sand on a coastline. Each division is different from the next. No sense of unity to be found between individual units. Gods above, even their weapons differ. Some units use energy-based weapon systems. The next wields archaic kinetic weaponry. The humans cannot even decide on a single military doctrine to employ during times of war. Chuck paused for effect. I mean, during their first contact war, when the Kenari tried to enslave them, that short 3-year conflict, the humans employed on average 20 to 30 different strategies each month, each distinctly different from the others. This included everything from so-called Zerg rushing, where the humans attacked in one massive frontal charge, to blitzkrieg, where the humans focused a strong assault on a narrow point, generally where the Kenari lines were weakest, breaking through and causing massive havoc behind enemy lines. At least, that's what I understood from the reports our observers sent back. What about their economy? Another counselor asked. Their economy, granted, is far superior to ours in structure and flexibility, whilst our output is far greater than theirs. Chuck admitted. They can and have, on numerous occasions in their history, converted entire sectors of their economy into war production facilities. And once the war was over, they simply undid the changes and got on with life. So what's the problem, then? One of the Emperor's bootlickers asked, no doubt trying to earn favor by asking what seemed like the obvious question. The fool didn't realize that Chuck was not yet finished with his report, and the Emperor was an old friend of his. As I have stated before, if threatened, the humans will unite into a singular entity and act as though controlled by a hive mind. Chuck said, his voice growing more serious. During my visit to the Sol system, from where they originate, I discovered that humans are Deathworlders. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Whilst at first glance their planet, Earth or Terra, depending on which person you ask in any one of their hundreds of languages, another thing that's infuriating about humans, by the way, can be classified as a Class 2 agricultural world, were it not for the abundance of water on the planet. Well, that assessment changes once you actually land on the surface. Chuck's expression grew dark. Global average temperatures along the equator average well over 50 degrees higher than that of our own homeworld. Bone-dried deserts ready to evaporate all the fluid in your body in what feels like seconds. Sweltering rainforests with humidity that makes breathing feel like drowning. And arid ice sheets where the moisture content in the air is even lower than that of a blasted desert. He paused, silently smiling at the looks of horror on the faces of the counselors. How can any species survive on such an abysmal planet? Another bootlicker asked, his voice trembling. The humans don't just survive in that hell, Chuck said with grim satisfaction. They evolved in it and revel in its infernal climates. And not only that, their planet has the widest variety of ecosystems I have personally ever seen on a singular world. And the humans? They have armed forces dedicated to fighting in each and every one of them. He let that sink in before adding. And that's not even the worst part. A shiver seemed to go through the chamber at those words. Please explain, the Emperor requested, looking a bit pale. He knew that Chuck was not one to lie, especially not in front of friends. The humans have something called the Internet, Chuck began, his voice taking on an almost haunted quality. It's a collective database of seemingly immeasurable size, most of which is accessible to each and every member of the human race. This includes some rather vivid images that, even now, 15 years later, I still try to forget. He shuddered. And gods above, the horrors of advertisements on the Internet. Thank the gods, a young teenager taught me the use of ad blockers. He shook himself. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. The humans have something they call MMO games. Except those things aren't games at all. The humans are training their youth to become savage soldiers with their MILSIM, short for military simulation, games. They train commanders through real-time strategy games and create mass murders with hack-and-slash games, all of which include achievements whereby the players need to slaughter, kill, or defeat massive amounts of their opponents, some of whom are modeled after members of the galactic community. I am starting to believe that the term craze may not be an apt description for humanity, the Minister of War commented, his voice hollow. It gets worse, Chuck continued relentlessly. As you know, ethanol alcohol is a highly poisonous substance to most individuals in the galactic community. The humans consume that stuff on a near-daily basis. Hell, individuals in nations called Ireland, Russia, the United States of America, Germany, Australia, and many others are able to drink a Ferocian thug under the table without even trying, then continue on challenging others throughout the night. They'll be fine, Chen's mother said, noticing his concern. They argue every year. Last week, they went camping together. Next week, they'll be arguing again. That's family. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Chuck found himself helping with the cleanup, another human tradition, apparently. Ambassador Chen worked beside him, drying dishes as he washed them. "Thank you for this," Chuck said quietly. "I understand now why you insisted." "What do you understand?" Chen asked. That humanity's strength isn't just about military tactics or economic flexibility or technological innovation. It's about this, the ability to disagree without becoming enemies, to argue without breaking bonds, to maintain individuality while remaining part of something larger. He paused. "It's about love, isn't it? That's the word you use." Chen smiled. "Yes, love for family, for community, for ideals bigger than ourselves. It's messy and complicated and sometimes painful, but it's what makes us human. And it's what we bring to the galaxy, the idea that you can be different, even opposed, and still be on the same side when it matters." Chuck looked out the window at the night sky, where stars were beginning to appear. "The Emperor asked me not to go too native. I fear I may have failed him in that regard. Or perhaps," Chin suggested, "you've succeeded in something more important. Building a bridge strong enough to carry both our peoples forward together." As Chuck made his way back to his residence that night, his communicator chimed with a message from the Mixtal homeworld. The Minister of Culture was requesting detailed reports on human family structures and social bonding rituals. Apparently, Chuck's enthusiastic descriptions of his experiences were inspiring changes back home. Mixtal families were beginning to experiment with shared meals and informal gatherings, breaking centuries of rigid social protocol. The revolution, Chuck realized, wasn't being fought with weapons or won through conquest. It was happening one shared meal, one awkward conversation, one moment of genuine connection at a time. The humans were teaching the galaxy something it had forgotten, that civilization wasn't about perfection or uniformity or strength through dominance. It was about the beautiful, chaotic, frustrating, wonderful mess of different beings choosing to build something together. And if that was crazy, then Chuck was proud to be infected with humanity's particular brand of insanity. 2 years after the treaty signing, the Galactic Assembly convened for the first time since humanity's official admission to the interstellar community. Representatives from 47 species gathered on the neutral station orbiting the ancient world of Kelmar 5, and the tension in the air was palpable. Chuck stood in the Mixtal delegation's preparation room, adjusting his formal robes while reviewing his notes. The Emperor had entrusted him with presenting humanity's case for full membership in the Assembly, a controversial proposition that had already sparked heated debates across the galaxy. "Nervous?" Ambassador Chen asked, appearing in the doorway. She wore her full diplomatic regalia, the medals on her chest representing not just her military service, but the various honors Earth's nations had bestowed upon her. Terrified, Chuck admitted, the Haxus delegation has been lobbying against human membership for months. They convince at least a dozen species that humanity is too aggressive, too unpredictable, too human. Chin smiled wryly. "They're not entirely wrong. We are all of those things. That's not helping. Chuck, you spent 3 years now studying us, living among us, becoming one of us in many ways. You know something that the Haxus and half the Assembly don't understand yet." She stepped closer, her expression serious. "Our unpredictability isn't a flaw. It's a feature. The galaxy has spent millennia developing rigid protocols, unchanging traditions, predictable responses. And you know what that creates? Stability? Stagnation," Chin corrected. "The same conflict repeating endlessly because everyone knows exactly what everyone else will do. The same solutions to the same problems, even when those solutions stopped working centuries ago. Humanity brings chaos, yes, but chaos is just another word for possibility. The call came for the delegations to enter the assembly chamber. As they walked through the corridors, Chuck noticed something unusual. Several other species representatives were watching Chun with expressions he'd learned to recognize. Not fear exactly, but a wary respect. The kind of look predators gave to other predators when acknowledging a rival. The assembly chamber was a marvel of engineering, a vast spherical space where delegations occupied floating platforms arranged in concentric rings. At the center hung a holographic display that could show anything from star charts to live feeds from across the galaxy. The presiding elder, a Valtorian whose species had led the assembly for the past 6 centuries, called the session to order. His voice, amplified by technology and enhanced by the chamber's acoustics, resonated like thunder. We gathered to address the petition of the Terran Alliance for full membership in the Galactic Assembly. The floor recognizes a Haxus Dominion. The Haxus representative, a different individual from the one who had led their disastrous war against humanity, rose on his platform. Honored Assembly, the Haxus Dominion acknowledges its past miscalculation regarding humanity. We attacked them, and we paid the price. But that very experience informs our opposition to their membership. He activated the central display, showing footage from the brief war. Human ships employing tactics that seemed to shift moment by moment. Human diplomats who threatened total destruction while offering peaceful terms. Human soldiers who fought with terrifying efficiency. Look at them, the Haxus representative declared. In 3 years of galactic presence, they have already begun reshaping the political landscape. Species that have been neutral for millennia are now signing defensive pacts with humanity. Trade routes that have remained unchanged for generations are being rerouted to accommodate human commerce. They are not joining our galactic community. They are transforming it. And is transformation such a terrible thing? The voice came from an unexpected source, the Keltharian delegation. The Keltharians were an ancient species, almost as old as the Voltorians, and notoriously conservative. Their representative, a crystalline being whose body refracted light into rainbow patterns, floated forward. For 8,000 years, this assembly has maintained peace through predictability. We all know our place, our role, our limits. And in that time, how much have we grown? How much have we truly advanced? The Keltharians form pulse with color. I have reviewed humanity's history. Did you know that in the span of just 200 of their years, a mere blink in galactic terms, they went from primitive combustion-based flight to establishing colonies on their own moon? That they went from believing their planet was the center of the universe to mapping the cosmic background radiation? The chamber erupted in murmurs. The Keltharian continued. They achieved this not despite their divisions, but because of them. Competition drove innovation. Different perspectives led to breakthrough insights. Conflict, managed conflict, became a crucible for growth. Perhaps the Haxus representative is correct. Perhaps humanity will transform our community. Perhaps that is precisely what we need. Chuck saw his moment. He signaled to the presiding elder, who acknowledged him. The assembly recognizes the Mixel delegation. Chuck's platform moved to the center of the chamber as his heart hammered in his chest. Hundreds of eyes and various other sensory organs focus on him. Honored delegates, he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. I stand before you not as someone who has merely studied humanity from a distance, but as someone who has lived among them, broken bread with them, learned from them. And yes, the Haxus representative is correct. Humanity will transform our community. They already have. He activated his own presentation, showing images from his time on Earth. But let me tell you what that transformation looks like. This is Geneva, where the Terran Alliance government meets. In this single city, I have witnessed representatives from former enemy nations working together on galactic policy. I have seen them argue passionately about the best course of action, then go out for drinks together afterward. I have watched them maintain their individual identities, their cultures, their beliefs, their traditions, while building something greater than any single nation could achieve. New images appeared. Mixel citizens participating in human cultural exchanges, human engineers working alongside alien scientists, joint military exercises where human adaptability was teaching other species new approaches to old problems. The humans have a saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. Their presence in the galaxy is that rising tide. Yes, they are unpredictable. Yes, they are aggressive when threatened. Yes, they refuse to conform to our established norms. And those qualities are exactly why we need them. Chuck's voice grew stronger, more passionate. For too long, we had confused peace with paralysis, stability with stagnation. The humans have reminded us that growth requires risk, that innovation requires the courage to fail, that true strength comes not from rigid adherence to tradition, but from the ability to adapt and evolve. He paused, looking around the chamber. I was sent to Earth as an observer, tasked with determining whether humanity was a threat or an asset, and I discovered something unexpected. They are both. They are a threat to our complacency, to our assumption that the way things have always been is the way things must always be. And they are an asset precisely because of that threat. They challenge us to be better, to think differently, to remember that civilization is not a destination but a journey. The Hax's representative tried to interject, but the presiding elder silenced him with a gesture. I have one final thing to show you, Chuck said, and the display changed to show a live feed from a Mixel homeworld. The footage showed something that would have been unthinkable just 3 years ago. Mixel families gathering for communal meals, young Mixel students studying human philosophy and art, Mixel scientists abandoning centuries-old research methods in favor of the human approach of trying new things and seeing what happens. This is what humanity has done to my world in just 3 years. They have not conquered us or threatened us or forced us to change. They have simply shown us a different way of being, and we have freely chosen, to learn from them. Is that not what this assembly should be about? Learning from each other? Growing together? He took a deep breath. Vote against human membership if you fear change. Vote against them if you prefer the comfortable predictability of the galaxy, as it has always been. But know that whether you admit them to this assembly or not, humanity is here to stay. The only question is whether we will have them as partners, with a voice in galactic affairs, or whether we will force them to chart their own course, taking with them all the species wise enough to recognize their potential. The chamber fell silent as Chuck's platform returned to its position. Ambassador Chin caught his eye and nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. The presiding elder called for discussion, and for the next several hours, delegations debated passionately. Some echoed the Hax's concerns about human unpredictability. Others, inspired by the Keltharian and Mixel testimonies, spoke of the need for fresh perspectives. A few remained neutral, waiting to see which way the political winds would blow. Finally, as the station's lights dimmed to simulate nightfall, the presiding elder called for a vote. All those in favor of granting the Terran Alliance full membership in the Galactic Assembly? Chuck held his breath as the votes were tallied. The holographic display showed the count rising, 31, 32, 33. The motion passes, the presiding elder announced, with 35 votes in favor, 8 against, and 4 abstentions. The Terran Alliance is hereby granted full membership in the Galactic Assembly, with all rights and responsibilities therein. The chamber erupted in a mixture of applause, protests, and various species-specific expressions of emotion. Chuck felt relief flood through him, followed immediately by a notification on his communicator. The Emperor, watching from Mixel Prime, sent a simple message. Well done, my friend. History was made today. Ambassador Chen's platform drifted close to his. Thank you, Chuck, for everything. Thank you for teaching an old bureaucrat that change isn't something to fear, he replied. Now comes the hard part, proving that we were right to take this chance. Oh, don't worry, Chen said with that characteristic human grin. We humans are excellent at proving people right, almost as excellent as we are at proving people wrong. You'll never quite know which one you're going to get. And that, Chuck said, finally understanding completely, is exactly the point.